The night was moonless when they came for her. Nora had scrubbed the Alpha's floors until her fingers bled, unaware that Elder Silas had already signed her name on the tribute list. She'd heard whispers of the ceremony, every girl in the pack had, but tributes were reserved for the elite bloodlines. High rankers with perfect shifting abilities, warrior daughters with pristine fur and royal connections, not wolfless Omegas who lived in the servants' quarters. When the guards dragged her to the ceremonial grounds, she thought it was a mistake. 10 she-wolves stood in a line beneath torches that painted their silk gowns crimson and sapphire and emerald. They were breathtaking. Daughters of betas, granddaughters of legendary warriors. And at the very end of the line, they shoved Nora, still wearing her stained work dress, and her dark hair tangled and her feet bare against the frozen earth. Make the pretty ones look prettier, Kira, the beta's daughter in the burgundy gown, hissed with a venomous smile. That's all you're good for, Omega. The pack gathered in the shadows, watching, waiting. Then the forest itself seemed to hold its breath as a figure emerged from the tree line. A man so massive he seemed carved from the mountain itself. Draven, the rogue Alpha. His dark coat billowed behind him, his hair wild and touched with amber in the torchlight. Scars ran across his weathered face like stories written in flesh. His eyes, molten gold and ancient, swept across the lineup and stopped on her. Nora's heart hammered as those eyes locked onto hers, seeing through skin and bone to something she didn't know existed. The other girls preened and postured, but Draven walked past them all as if they were ghosts. He stopped directly in front of Nora, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. "This one," he growled, his voice like thunder over stone. "Give me the one who cannot shift." The journey up the mountain took 3 hours, though Nora lost track of time somewhere between terror and exhaustion. Draven carried her when her bare feet began to bleed, his massive arms cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed nothing. She'd expected roughness, cruelty. The pack had taught her that power always came with pain. But his touch was careful, almost reverent, and when she flinched at a sudden noise in the trees, his growl was protective rather than threatening. "Nothing will harm you here," he'd said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. Not while I breathe." She didn't believe him, couldn't afford to. Trust was a luxury Omegas didn't survive long enough to indulge. The volcanic peaks rose before them like jagged teeth against the star-scattered sky, wreathed in steam that smelled of sulfur and minerals. Nora had expected a fortress, perhaps, or a crude den carved from stone. What she found instead stole the breath from her lungs. The sanctuary sprawled across a series of natural terraces built into the mountainside with an engineer's precision and an artist's eye. Caves with smooth carved entrances glowed with warm firelight from within. Hot springs sent ribbons of steam curling into the cold air, their surfaces mirror-bright and inviting. Wooden walkways connected different levels, and everywhere, there were wolves. Not the pristine, powerful specimens the Golden Moon Pack prized. These wolves were different. A massive male with burn scars covering half his body tended a fire pit, his remaining eye tracking their approach with cautious curiosity. 2 she-wolves sat near a spring, one missing an ear, the other so small she might have been mistaken for a juvenile, despite the gray threading her muzzle. A group of younger wolves practiced combat forms on a flat stretch of stone, moving with the fluid grace of warriors despite visible injuries, a missing hand, a pronounced limp, scars that spoke of survived horrors. They all stopped to stare when Draven appeared with Nora in his arms. "She's under my protection," Draven announced, his voice carrying across the terraces with undeniable authority. "Anyone who wishes to challenge that can do so now." Silence. Then one by one, the gathered wolves dipped their heads in acknowledgement. Not submission. Nora had seen enough forced submission to recognize the difference. But respect. Understanding. Draven carried her to a cave near the largest hot spring, setting her down gently just inside the entrance. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with sleeping furs piled in one corner, a small fire pit ringed with stones, and shelves carved directly into the rock walls. Someone had hung dried herbs from the ceiling, filling the space with the scent of sage and lavender. "This is yours," Draven said, stepping back immediately to give her space. "No one will enter without your permission, not even me." Nora stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden cruelty. At the Golden Moon Pack, privacy was a privilege reserved for high rankers. Omegas slept in communal barracks, their few possessions subject to random inspection and confiscation. The idea of a space that belonged to her alone felt like a trick her exhausted mind had conjured. "I don't understand," she whispered. Draven's amber eyes softened. "You will. Rest. Eat. Tomorrow, you can decide what comes next." He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading into the night sounds of the sanctuary, crackling fires, quiet conversations, the distant howl of a wolf greeting the moon. Nora stood in the center of her cave, trembling, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. She must have dozed off, huddled against the wall, because she woke to the sound of someone clearing their throat near the entrance. Pale dawn light filtered through the opening, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. And a young wolf stood just outside, balancing a wooden tray loaded with food. He couldn't have been more than 16, with a shock of copper-red hair and freckles scattered across his nose. When he shifted his weight, Nora noticed the way his right leg twisted at an unnatural angle, the careful way he compensated for the limp. "Morning," he said cheerfully, apparently unbothered by her wide-eyed staring. "I'm Finn. Draven asked me to bring you breakfast. May I come in?" The question, the request for permission, nearly undid her. Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Finn limped inside with practiced ease, setting the tray on a flat stone near the fire pit. Steam rose from a bowl of porridge, sweetened with honey and berries. Fresh bread, still warm, strips of dried meat, a clay mug filled with herbal tea that smelled of mint and chamomile. "Oh, it's not fancy," Finn said apologetically. "But Mara's a good cook. She's the elder who runs the kitchens, lost her mate and pups to a pack raid years ago, so she's adopted all of us as replacements." He grinned, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Fair warning, she'll try to fatten you up. She thinks everyone's too skinny." Nora stared at the food, her stomach cramping with hunger and suspicion warring inside her. At the pack, servants ate scraps after everyone else had finished. This looked like a meal meant for someone important. "Is this really for me?" she asked quietly. Finn's grin faded, replaced by something sadder and more knowing. "Yeah, and before you ask, it's not poisoned or a test or a trick, it's just breakfast." He settled onto a nearby rock, his twisted legs stretched out before him. "Draven collects broken things, you know, or at least that's what the other packs say. I think he just recognizes treasure when he sees it." "I'm not treasure," Nora said automatically. "I'm defective. Everyone knows that." "Everyone's wrong." Finn's voice carried absolute conviction. "I was born with this leg. My birth pack called me useless, tried to leave me in the woods for predators when I was 3. My mother smuggled me out, brought me here. Draven took us both in, taught me to fight with my differences instead of against them. Now I'm one of his best scouts. Wolves don't expect someone with a limp to outmaneuver them, so I use their assumptions as camouflage." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with earnest intensity. "You can't shift, right? That's what the whispers say. But maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe you're meant for something else entirely." The words settled into Nora's chest like seeds waiting for soil. She wanted to dismiss them, to cling to the familiar narrative that had defined her existence. But something in Finn's unwavering certainty made her hesitate. She ate. The food was simple but delicious, and with each bite, some of the numbness that had insulated her since the tribute ceremony began to thaw. Finn kept up a steady stream of cheerful commentary, pointing out various sanctuary residents through the cave entrance and sharing their stories with obvious affection. After breakfast, Nora explored. The sanctuary was larger than she'd realized, with terraces stretching deep into the mountain's embrace. She passed a training ground where warriors practiced with staffs and blades, calling out encouragement to each other. A healing cave where an elderly wolf with milky white eyes mixed poultices despite his blindness, his other senses compensating with remarkable precision. A nursery where pups of mixed heritage played under the watchful eyes of caregivers who bore scars but offered smiles. No one stared at her with contempt. No one whispered about her defects or moved away when she passed. They simply nodded or offered quiet greetings, accepting her presence with the same matter-of-fact kindness they showed each other. It was deeply, terrifyingly foreign. Throughout the day, Nora found small gifts appearing outside her cave, a stack of soft furs in shades of gray and cream, a selection of books with worn leather covers, dried fruit and nuts in a carved wooden bowl, a simple dress in deep forest green, sized perfectly to fit her frame. Yet she never saw Draven deliver them, but she felt his presence like a constant warmth at the edges of her awareness. He kept his distance, true to his word, but she caught glimpses of him throughout the sanctuary, helping repair a damaged walkway, settling a dispute between younger wolves, standing watch at the perimeter with his gaze scanning the forest below. As twilight painted the peaks in shades of amber and violet, Nora found herself drawn to a secluded area near the sanctuary's highest point. A simple stone marker stood surrounded by night-blooming flowers, their white petals luminous in the fading light. Draven knelt before it, his massive frame somehow diminished by grief. Nora should have retreated, given him privacy, but his voice carried to her hiding spot among the rocks, raw and aching with loss. Her name was Sarah, he said to the grave. My sister. She was born deaf, and the pack elders called it a weakness, said she'd be a liability in battle, couldn't hear warnings or commands. His hands clenched into fists. They ordered me to take her into the woods and end it quickly. Mercy, they called it. I refused, challenged the Alpha himself. Silence stretched, broken only by the wind whistling through stone. I fought well, nearly won, but they cheated. 3 betas attacked from behind while I was engaged. When I woke, they'd already... His voice cracked. She was 8 years old. 8. And I failed her. Nora's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound of horror and sympathy. I swore then that I'd never fail another outcast, Draven continued, his voice steadying into something harder, more resolved. Ye built this place for all the ones the packs throw away. But I've been going through motions, Sarah. Just surviving. Until I saw her in that lineup. He pressed his scarred hand against the stone marker. I won't fail this one, he promised, the words of vow carved from bedrock and determination. She has your eyes, you know. That same fire underneath the fear. I'll protect her. I'll help her see what I see, that she's not broken. She's perfect exactly as she is. Nora retreated silently, her heart thundering against her ribs. Back in her cave, she wrapped herself in the gifted furs and stared at the ceiling, processing everything she'd learned. Draven wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd lost everything and rebuilt it into something beautiful. A sanctuary not of perfection, but of acceptance. And somehow, impossibly, that he saw her as worthy of protection. For the first time in her life, Nora allowed herself to consider a dangerous possibility. Maybe the pack had been wrong. Maybe she wasn't worthless. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. The nightmare always started the same way. Nora was 12 again, standing in the center of the pack's training grounds while Elder Silas circled her like a predator savoring wounded prey. The other young wolves had shifted hours ago, their first transformations celebrated with howls of triumph and proud parental embraces. She'd stood there trembling, trying with every fiber of her being to feel the change everyone promised would come. Nothing happened. Her skin remained stubbornly human. No fur, no fangs, no power. Defective, Silas had pronounced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. The bloodline is tainted. This creature cannot even accomplish what pups manage instinctively. In the dream, just like in memory, he'd grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the punishment cages. Silver-laced boxes barely large enough for a child to crouch inside. The metal burned where it touched her skin, leaving blisters that wept and festered. 3 days, Silas had announced, to teach you the cost of failure. The cage door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her, and the screaming began. Hers, echoing off stone walls while the pack went about their evening as if she didn't exist. Nora jolted awake gasping, her body drenched in sweat despite the cool mountain air. The furs tangled around her legs felt like restraints. The cave walls pressed inward like cage bars. Her lungs couldn't find enough oxygen, each breath coming in sharp, painful hitches. She scrambled outside, desperate for space, for air, for anything that didn't feel like confinement. Her bare feet slapped against cold stone as she stumbled toward the nearest hot spring, falling to her knees at its edge. Steam curled around her like ghostly fingers. The trembling wouldn't stop. Neither would the memories, flooding through the cracks the nightmare had opened. Kira's cruel laughter as she accidentally spilled scalding soup down Nora's back during a feast. The beta's son who'd pushed her down a flight of stairs, then blamed her for being clumsy when she'd limped for weeks afterward. The countless high rankers who'd used her as target practice during combat training, knowing she couldn't shift to defend herself or heal quickly from their strikes. And always, always, Elder Silas watching with those cold eyes, documenting each failure, each weakness, as if compiling evidence for a trial where the verdict had been decided before she was born. "You're breathing too fast." Nora's head snapped up. Draven stood several feet away, his massive frame backlit by the glow of distant fires. He made no move to approach, his hands visible and open at his sides. "I'm sorry," she managed between gasps. "I didn't mean to. I'll go back." "No." His voice was firm but gentle. "You're having a panic attack. Fighting it makes it worse. May I sit?" She nodded, unable to articulate why his careful request for permission made her throat tighten with emotion. Draven settled onto a flat rock a careful distance away, far enough that she didn't feel cornered, but close enough that his presence registered as solid and real. But he didn't look at her directly, instead gazing out at the sanctuary spread below them. "Breathe with me," he said quietly. "In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Don't think about why or what comes next. Just count." His breathing became audible and deliberate, a rhythm she could anchor to. Nora tried to match it, stumbling at first, but gradually her lungs remembered how to function. The trembling eased, the world stopped tilting quite so violently. They sat in silence for long minutes, nothing but breath and mountain wind and the distant murmur of the springs. "I was 7 when my sister was born," Draven said finally, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. "My father was Beta of the Ironwood Pack, second in command, favored by the Alpha, destined to lead. I was being groomed to follow his path. Sarah's birth should have been a celebration." Nora found herself listening, despite the lingering panic, drawn by something raw and unguarded in his tone. But she didn't cry when she emerged, didn't respond to sound. The pack healer examined her and declared her deaf. Draven's jaw tightened. In Ironwood, any deviation from perfect was considered weakness. Weakness was intolerable. My father wanted to handle it immediately, take her into the woods, make it quick and clean. My mother refused. She fought him for 8 years, protected Sarah every day. He paused, and Nora saw his hands clench against his thighs. "When I was 15, my mother died in a hunting accident. At least that's what they called it. I found out later the Alpha arranged it. She'd become too vocal about changing the pack's traditions, as too insistent that different didn't mean lesser." His voice dropped to something harder, edged with controlled fury. "With her gone, there was no one to stop the council when they ordered Sarah's execution. My father delivered the command himself, Told me it was my duty as future beta to carry it out, prove my loyalty to pack law over sentiment. Nora's breath caught. She knew how this story ended. She'd heard him at Sarah's grave, but hearing the details carved fresh wounds across her heart. I said no, challenged my father in front of the entire pack, fought 3 enforcers who tried to stop me from taking Sarah and running. Draven's scarred hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, tracing old injuries beneath his shirt. I almost made it, got her to the border, but they caught us, held me down and made me watch while they... He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish. When they finally let me go, they stripped my rank, declared me rogue, and told me if I ever returned, they'd finish what they started. So I left. Wandered for 2 years, half dead from grief, until I found these peaks. Started taking in others like Sarah, the ones their packs threw away. He finally turned to look at Nora, his amber eyes reflecting firelight. They called me rogue when I refused to be a monster, but being rogue just means choosing conscience over cruelty, and I'd make the same choice every time. Nora's vision blurred with tears she hadn't realized were falling. She was lucky to have you. No, Draven's voice turned rough. I failed her. I should have been faster, stronger, smarter, should have seen the trap before they sprang it. You were 15, Nora whispered. Fighting trained warriors to save your sister from systematic murder. That's not failure. Her voice broke. That's more than anyone ever did for me. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Draven's expression shifted into something fierce and protective. Tell me. So she did. It poured out of her like poison from a lanced wound. The cage, the beatings, the casual cruelties that had accumulated into a lifetime of learning she was worthless. She told him about the time Kira had practiced her claws on Nora's back, leaving scars that never fully faded. About the high rankers who'd starved her for days, then mocked her for being weak when she collapsed during labor. About Elder Silas's particular brand of torment, always justified as correction or discipline, had designed to break her spirit so thoroughly she'd never dare dream of anything better. He used to say I was proof the moon goddess made mistakes, Nora said, her voice hollow. That my existence was a test of the pack's strength, to see if we could endure the burden of defective bloodlines without being dragged down. Draven's growl rumbled through the night, feral and furious. That bastard wouldn't recognize the moon goddess's work if she bit him. Despite everything, Nora almost smiled. You sound certain. I am. Draven leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused entirely on her. You want to know what I saw when I looked at that lineup? 10 wolves so polished and perfect, they'd been stripped of anything real, shined up like trophies, trained to perform, empty behind the eyes. And then there was you. He held her gaze, unflinching. You stood there, terrified and defiant at once, trembling but not breaking. Your eyes were alive, Nora, full of fire and fight and everything those high rankers had trained out of themselves to fit their narrow definition of worthy. His voice softened. I saw someone who'd survived hell and still had a soul. That's not weakness. That's the rarest kind of strength. Nora wanted to argue, to list all the ways she was damaged and insufficient, but the words wouldn't come. Draven spoke with such conviction, such certainty, that it cracked something open inside her, a possibility she'd never dared consider. I don't know how to be what you think I am, she admitted quietly. You don't have to be anything except yourself. Draven shifted slightly, his posture relaxing as the fury drained into something gentler. No expectations here. No roles to perform. You want to train? Train. You want to heal? Heal. You want to spend 6 months doing nothing but reading by the springs? Do that. The only requirement in my sanctuary is that you treat others with the respect you wish you'd been given. What if I can't shift? The question emerged barely above a whisper. What if I really am defective? Then you're defective, Draven said simply, and you're still welcome, still valuable, still deserving of safety and choice and every good thing they denied you. He paused. But for what it's worth, I don't think you're defective. I think there's something in you the pack was too blind to see, something that scared them, so they tried to bury it under cruelty and lies. Nora absorbed this, turning it over in her mind like a strange new stone that might be worthless or might be precious beyond measure. The panic had fully receded now, leaving her hollowed out but strangely lighter, as if speaking the horrors aloud had stolen some of their power. "Thank you," she said finally, "for sitting with me, for telling me about Sarah." Draven stood slowly, giving her time to adjust to the movement. "The nightmares will come back. Healing isn't linear, but you don't have to face them alone anymore." He gestured toward the sanctuary spread below. "We all have chains from our pasts, some heavier than others. Here, we help each other bear the weight until we're strong enough to break them." He left her there by the springs, disappearing into the network of terraces with the quiet grace of a predator who'd learned to gentle his steps around damaged things. Nora sat watching the steam rise from heated water, feeling the mountain's solid strength beneath her, listening to the sounds of a community built on shared brokenness and stubborn survival. For the first time since the tribute ceremony, she felt something other than fear curling in her chest. It might have been hope. The celebration had been Mara's idea. The elderly cook had declared that new life deserved joy, and no one in the sanctuary was foolish enough to argue with her when she got that determined glint in her milky eyes. So they'd gathered on the largest terrace as twilight painted the peaks in shades of rose and gold, preparing to welcome the newest member of their makeshift family. Yet Nora hung back near the edges, still uncertain of her place among these people who'd accepted her with such bewildering ease. 2 weeks had passed since her arrival. 2 weeks of slowly learning that kindness didn't always hide cruelty, that safety could exist without constant vigilance. It was exhausting, unlearning survival. The mother was a young she-wolf named Lyra, who'd fled her pack 6 months pregnant, choosing homelessness over raising her daughter in a place that valued rank over love. She sat now in a nest of furs, cradling a tiny bundle that occasionally released small, squeaking sounds. Her mate, a scarred warrior named Torch, who'd lost half his face to a bear attack, hovered nearby with the anxious devotion of someone still amazed by his good fortune. "She's perfect," Lyra kept whispering, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ah, look at her fingers, her little nose. She's absolutely perfect." Finn appeared at Nora's elbow, balancing 2 cups of spiced wine that smelled of cinnamon and cloves. "First birth in the sanctuary in 3 years," he said cheerfully, handing her a cup. "Mara's been cooking for days. I think she made enough food to feed an army." He wasn't exaggerating. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, honey cakes, and dried fruits preserved from the previous autumn. Someone had strung lanterns between the terraces, creating a constellation of warm light that pushed back the gathering dark. Draven moved through the crowd with quiet authority, greeting pack members with clasped forearms and genuine smiles. He'd kept his distance from Nora since their conversation by the springs, giving her space to adjust. But she felt his presence like a constant warmth at the edge of her awareness. Their eyes met across the celebration, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, connection, the beginning of trust. He nodded slightly before turning back to congratulate Torch with a fierce embrace. Music started somewhere, drums and flutes creating a rhythm that spoke of ancient wolf songs and modern hope blended together. Wolves began to dance, some in human form, others shifting to celebrate on 4 legs. Laughter rose like smoke, genuine and unforced. Nora sipped her wine, feeling something strange and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It took her several minutes to identify it. Belonging. "Come on," Finn urged, tugging at her sleeve. "You can't hide in corners forever. Mara will drag you out herself if you don't participate voluntarily. And trust me, you don't want to be on the receiving end of her grandmother guilt." Before Nora could protest, she found herself swept into the celebration's current. Mara pressed a plate of food into her hands, A grizzled warrior named Stone taught her the basic steps of a traditional pack dance, his remaining eye crinkling with amusement when she stumbled. A group of younger wolves pulled her into their circle, chattering about patrol routes and pranks with the easy camaraderie of siblings. The warmth in Nora's chest grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She attributed it to the wine, the exercise, the unfamiliar sensation of joy. An hour into the celebration, a refugee named Marcus, a wolf who'd lost his pack to a territorial dispute, raised his cup in a toast. His words were already slurred, his movements unsteady. To new beginnings, he proclaimed, swaying dangerously near one of the torch stands. To Draven, who builds homes from broken. His elbow caught the torch stand. The wooden pole tipped, sending the flaming brand arcing through the air in a spray of sparks. It landed directly on one of the supply tents. Fire bloomed instantly, hungry and bright. The canvas went up like kindling, flames racing across treated fabric with terrifying speed. The tent housed medical supplies, dried herbs, bandages, all combustible, all irreplaceable. Wolves scattered, shouting. Someone ran for water. Draven was already moving, barking orders, organizing a response. But Nora stood frozen, watching the flames climb higher. The warmth in her chest suddenly intensified, becoming almost painful. It wasn't external heat. It came from somewhere deep inside, rising like a tide she couldn't name or control. The fire reflected in her eyes, dancing orange and red, and beneath it, something else stirred, something silver and ancient and entirely foreign. She didn't think, didn't plan. Her body moved on pure instinct, hands rising toward the blaze. Light exploded from her palms. Not flame, not anything natural or explainable. Pure silver radiance erupted from her skin, flowing from her fingertips in waves that hummed with power. It washed over the burning tent like liquid moonlight, touching each flame with impossible gentleness. The fire didn't so much extinguish as transform, orange and red bleeding to silver and white before fading completely, leaving behind nothing but faint wisps of steam and the smell of ozone. Silence crashed down like a physical force. Met every wolf in the sanctuary stood frozen, staring at Nora, at her hands, still glowing faintly with residual light, at her eyes, which she couldn't see but could feel were reflecting something that had never been there before. The warmth in her chest pulsed once more, then settled into something that felt less like intrusion and more like recognition, like a door opening to a room that had always existed, just waiting for her to find the key. Marcus dropped his cup. The clay shattered against stone, the sound impossibly loud. Nora's hands began to shake. The light flickered and died, leaving her standing in ordinary human skin, ordinary human form. Except nothing felt ordinary anymore. "I didn't," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what—" Draven moved through the crowd with purpose. His expression transformed from shock into something that looked dangerously close to reverence. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes catching the lantern light. "You're not broken," he breathed, his voice rough with wonder and certainty combined. "Gods, Nora, you're not broken. You're sealed." Sealed? The word felt foreign on her tongue. His hands hovered near hers, not quite touching, as if he was afraid the contact might shatter whatever fragile magic had just manifested. "There are legends, stories my grandmother told me when I was young, before the pack decided such tales were foolish superstition." He looked up, meeting her bewildered gaze. "Come with me, I need to show you something." He didn't wait for agreement, trusting she would follow. And Nora glanced around at the gathered wolves, all still frozen, watching with expressions ranging from awe to confusion to fear, before hurrying after Draven's retreating form. He led her away from the celebration, up a winding path to a cave she'd never entered. His personal quarters, she realized. The entrance was larger than hers, the interior split into distinct areas, sleeping space, storage, a work area with a desk covered in maps and reports. But Draven bypassed all of it, heading straight to the back wall where shadows gathered thickest. He grabbed a torch, bringing light to bear on stone that Nora had assumed was bare and unremarkable. She'd been wrong. The entire back wall was covered in carvings, ancient and intricate. Symbols spiraled across the rock in patterns that seemed to shift in the flickering firelight. Wolves, yes. But not ordinary wolves. These were massive creatures, limbed in suggested light, their forms surrounded by crescents and stars and geometric designs that hurt to look at directly. My grandmother was a storyteller, Draven said quietly, tracing one of the symbols with reverent fingers. The pack called her foolish, said she filled my head with nonsense, but she insisted these stories were true, passed down through her bloodline for generations. He moved the torch, illuminating a particularly elaborate carving. She told me there are wolves, and then there are guardians born of moonlight itself. Lumina, she called them. The moon goddesses chosen, blessed with powers beyond shifting. They were mediators, judges, protectors of balance. Nora stepped closer, drawn to the carvings despite the fear curling in her stomach. So one image showed a wolf larger than the others, its form radiating lines that suggested illumination. Smaller wolves bowed before it, not in submission, but in reverence. "What happened to them?" she whispered. "They disappeared. Centuries ago, maybe longer. The stories say they were hunted. Some wolves feared their power, saw them as threats to traditional pack hierarchy. Others tried to capture and control them, use them as weapons." Draven's jaw tightened. My grandmother believed the last Lumina went into hiding, sealing their power to protect their descendants, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to accept them again. He turned to face Nora fully, the torch casting half his face in shadow and half in gold. "Your inability to shift was never a defect, Nora. It was a seal. And a lock placed on power so immense that it had to be hidden, even from you." His voice dropped to something almost reverent. "You're not broken. You're a moon guardian. And that light I just saw? That was the seal beginning to crack." Nora's legs suddenly felt unreliable. She sat heavily on a nearby rock, processing information that rewrote everything she'd believed about herself. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. An Omega, I can't even—" "Can't shift into an ordinary wolf," Draven interrupted gently. "Because you were never meant to. You're meant for something greater." The words should have felt like salvation. Instead, they terrified her. Greater meant visible. Visible meant vulnerable, and vulnerability in her experience invited cruelty. "I don't want to be special," she said quietly. "I just want to be safe." Draven knelt before her, bringing his eyes level with hers. "You can be both. That's why you're here, why the seal chose this moment to crack. You're finally somewhere safe enough, with someone who sees you clearly enough, that your power knows it can emerge without being destroyed." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his thumb across her knuckles. Where he touched, warmth bloomed. Different from the silver light, but no less powerful. "We'll figure this out together," he promised. "No pressure, no expectations, just exploration, discovery, at your pace." Nora looked down at her hands, ordinary and small in the torchlight. An hour ago, they'd channeled power that defied explanation. She could still feel it humming beneath her skin, dormant but present, waiting. "What if I can't control it?" she asked. Then we'll learn control together." Draven's certainty never wavered. "You've survived everything the pack threw at you. This is just one more challenge. Except this time, you don't face it alone." Outside, the celebration had resumed, tentative at first, but gaining momentum. Wolves called to each other, processing what they'd witnessed with the pragmatic acceptance of people who'd seen too much strangeness to dismiss anything as impossible. Nora sat in Draven's cave, staring at ancient carvings that suggested she was more than the worthless Omega the pack had tried to make her believe. The warmth in her chest pulsed steadily, no longer painful, almost welcoming. Moon Guardian, she whispered, testing the words. Draven smiled, fierce and proud. Moon Guardian. They came with the first snow. 5 wolves cresting the ridge at dawn like dark stains against pristine white. Nora spotted them from her cave entrance, her newfound awareness prickling with warning before her eyes confirmed the threat. She recognized Kira immediately. The beta's daughter moved with practiced arrogance even at this distance, her burgundy cloak whipping in the wind like a banner of authority. 4 warriors flanked her, all high rankers whose names Nora had once been required to memorize and defer to. The sanctuary stirred to life around her. Draven emerged from his cave already alert, his posture shifting from sleep-softened to battle-ready in heartbeats. Finn limped past, heading for the alarm bell. Within minutes, the entire pack had assembled on the main terrace, a wall of scarred but unbroken wolves facing the approaching envoy. But Kira descended the path with deliberate slowness, making them wait, making them aware of her presumed superiority. When she finally reached the terrace, her lip curled in practiced disdain as she surveyed the gathered outcasts. "How quaint," she drawled. "The island of misfit toys. I'd heard the rogue Alpha collected broken things, but seeing it is almost sad." Draven's growl rumbled like distant thunder, but he held position, waiting. Kira's eyes swept the crowd and landed on Nora with predatory focus. "There you are. The Golden Moon Pack has come to retrieve its property." The word, property, landed like a physical blow. Nora felt the old conditioning rise instinctively, the urge to duck her head, apologize, comply, but the warmth in her chest pulsed once, by reminding her of silver light and ancient carvings, and a truth she was only beginning to understand. "She's not property," Draven said, his voice carrying lethal softness. "She's under my protection as my chosen mate. The tribute was accepted. She stays." Kira laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Mate? Her?" She gestured dismissively at Nora. "She can't even shift. What use is she to anyone except as a servant? Elder Silas demands her return. She has unfinished business with the pack." Something cold slithered down Nora's spine at the way Kira emphasized those words. Unfinished business. Elder Silas, who'd locked her in silver cages and looked at her with eyes that suggested he knew something she didn't. "The Omega goes nowhere," Draven stated flatly. His wolves shifted positions subtly, forming a tighter protective circle around Nora. "Bet you can't steal her just because she's exotic to you," Kira sneered. "Some rogue fascination with defects doesn't override pack law. She was born Golden Moon. She belongs to us." The words ignited something in Nora's chest, not the silver warmth this time, but white-hot fury that had been building for 17 years. Every beating, every humiliation, every moment of learned helplessness crystallized into a single point of absolute clarity. She stepped forward, moving through the protective circle before anyone could stop her. "I was never your property," Nora said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart, "and I'm not going back." Silence crashed down. Even Kira looked momentarily stunned that the wolfless Omega had dared to speak, let alone contradict her directly. Yet then rage transformed Kira's beautiful features into something savage and ugly. "You don't get to decide that, you worthless!" She lunged, shifting mid-leap into a sleek auburn wolf with cream markings and ivory fangs bared in fury. Fast, trained, lethal. Nora couldn't shift to meet her, couldn't transform into anything that might defend against teeth and claws designed to rend flesh. She could only stand her ground and brace for impact. It never came. Draven's wolves moved as one, forming a living shield around Nora. Stone stepped forward with a roar, intercepting Kira's trajectory. She twisted in midair, landing in a crouch, snarling at the wall of defiance. "Stand down," one of the Golden Moon warriors called to Kira, his voice tight with warning. "This isn't the mission." But Kira was beyond hearing, beyond reason. She'd been raised believing Omegas existed to serve, that hierarchy was sacred and immutable. Nora's defiance was more than personal insult. It was existential threat to everything Kira's world was built upon. She feinted left, then darted right, trying to find an opening in the protective circle. The sanctuary wolves held firm, growling warnings but not attacking, waiting for Draven's command. The rogue alpha stood utterly still, watching Kira with eyes that had gone cold and predatory. When he finally moved, it was with the terrible grace of an avalanche, inevitable and unstoppable. His shift was the most beautiful, terrifying thing Nora had ever witnessed. One moment he was a man, scarred and massive. The next he was something beyond ordinary wolf, a creature of nightmare and legend combined. And black fur rippled across a frame easily twice the size of Kira's wolf, silver streaks running through his coat like veins of precious metal. His eyes burned molten gold, ancient and merciless. This was the beast of the peak, the monster mothers threatened their pups with. Death in wolf form. Kira froze, her earlier rage evaporating into visceral terror. Draven stalked forward, each step measured and deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't need to. The outcome was foregone conclusion. When Kira finally broke and ran, he was on her in 3 bounds. His jaws closed on her shoulder, not killing, but marking. His fangs tore through fur and flesh with surgical precision, leaving a wound that would scar prominently. A message carved in pain and blood. This is what happens when you threaten what's mine. He released her with a shake that sent her tumbling across snow-dusted stone. She scrambled upright, shifted back to human form, clutching her bleeding shoulder. The other Golden Moon wolves had their hands on weapons but made no move to intervene. They weren't stupid enough to fight the rogue alpha on his own territory. Draven shifted back to human, standing naked and unbothered in the cold, blood on his lips and murder in his eyes. "Go back to your elder," he said softly, the words more threatening than any shout. "Tell him the Omega is mine. Tell him if he sends anyone else, I'll return them in pieces." Kira staggered to her feet, pain and humiliation warring in her expression. But as the warriors moved to support her retreat, she locked eyes with Nora one final time. "Elder Silas has friends you can't imagine, Omega," she hissed, met her voice raw with something that might have been warning or might have been spite. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you are, what's coming for you. Running to the rogue won't save you." The envoy retreated up the ridge, Kira's blood leaving a trail of crimson drops against pristine snow. Nora stood trembling in the aftermath, adrenaline still singing through her veins. Draven approached slowly, and someone handed him a cloak that he wrapped around himself before stopping in front of her. "Are you hurt?" His voice had gentled considerably, the predator subsumed beneath concern. Nora shook her head, unable to form words. She'd just defied the pack that had owned every moment of her existence, had watched Draven defend her with savage certainty, had heard Kira's warning about things coming for her, as about friends Elder Silas possessed. "What did she mean?" Nora finally managed. "About Silas's friends?" Draven's expression darkened. "I don't know, but we'll find out." He glanced at the blood trail disappearing over the ridge. "And we'll be ready." The hidden chamber revealed itself by accident. Nora had been exploring the deeper caves, restless with questions Kira's warning had planted, when her hand brushed against what she'd assumed was solid rock. The stone shifted beneath her touch, grinding sideways to expose a narrow passage that exhaled stale air and secrets. She should have fetched Draven, should have told someone before venturing into unmapped darkness. But the silver warmth in her chest pulsed with recognition, pulling her forward like a lodestone finding north. And the passage opened into a chamber barely larger than her sleeping quarters, the walls lined with shelves carved directly into stone. And on those shelves, preserved by the mountain's dry cold, sat dozens of leather-bound texts and rolled scrolls, their surfaces thick with dust but intact. Nora's hands trembled as she lifted the first tome, careful of its fragile binding. The script was old, portions faded to near illegibility, but she could make out enough. Moon guardians, lumina, celestial forms, the same terms Draven had spoken while showing her his grandmother's carvings. She needed help, needed someone who could read the archaic language more fluently than her halting attempts. Finn arrived within minutes of her summons, his eyes widening at the chamber's discovery. "How did you find this?" "And Draven's had wolves map every inch of these caves." "It found me," Nora said simply, because no other explanation made sense. They worked through the afternoon and into evening, Finn's youth belying his scholarly knowledge. He'd been educated before his birth pack abandoned him, and his memory for languages proved invaluable. "This one's a genealogy," he murmured, carefully unrolling a scroll. "Moon Guardian bloodlines traced back, gods, centuries. Look at the naming conventions of the Silver Dawn, of the Twilight Hunt, of the First Snow. They took titles from celestial events." Nora leaned closer, scanning names that meant nothing to her, until Finn's finger stopped on an entry near the scroll's end, where the bloodlines converged to a single thread. "Alara of the Silver Dawn," he read. "Last confirmed moon priestess. The status, deceased. Date, 17 years ago." He glanced up. "Nora, that's the year you were born." The chamber suddenly felt airless. Nora's vision tunneled, focusing entirely on that name. Alara. She'd never known her mother's name. The pack had refused to speak of her, called her origins irrelevant since she was merely a servant. "Keep reading," she whispered. Finn's voice steadied, professional despite the tremor underneath. Alara served as mediator during the territorial disputes of the northern packs. Known for her ability to manifest lunar fire, defensive light that could purify corruption. She disappeared following the Golden Moon massacre, whereabouts unknown. Later confirmed killed protecting. He paused, swallowing hard. Protecting her infant daughter from those who would devour divine light. Nora's breath came in sharp gasps. Her mother had been a moon priestess, had possessed power, had died defending her. "Oh, there's more," Finn said quietly, pulling out a thin volume wrapped in oilcloth. "Personal journals, I think." He opened it carefully, and a loose parchment slipped free. Not text this time, but a portrait rendered in faded inks. A woman's face looked out from the page, preserved across 17 years of separation. Dark hair falling in waves around a heart-shaped face. High cheekbones, a small scar through one eyebrow, and eyes, deep brown flecked with gold, shaped exactly like the ones Nora saw in Stillwater's reflection. "That's my mother," Nora breathed, tears already streaming down her cheeks. She looks like you," Finn finished gently. "She looks exactly like you." Nora sank to the floor, clutching the portrait to her chest as 17 years of loss crashed over her in waves. But she'd always known her mother was dead, the pack had made that much clear, but she'd never known who her mother was. Never imagined she might have been someone powerful, someone who'd fought to protect her, someone who'd loved her enough to die for her. The journal contained fragments of Alara's final months. Scattered entries spoke of growing danger, of wolves who'd learned about the Moon Guardians and wanted to harness their power, of a decision made in desperation and love. Finn read aloud, his voice cracking on certain phrases. "The seal is the only way. If I bind her power deeply enough, they won't sense her. She'll live as ordinary, hidden among them, until the time comes for her awakening. She'll hate me for the weakness, the suffering I'm condemning her to. But alive and powerless is better than dead or enslaved. My darling girl, on my silver dawn, forgive me. Forgive me for the chains I place upon you. Know that I loved you more than light itself." The final entry was dated the day before Alara's death. "They've found us. I can hold them long enough for the midwife to take her to the pack. They'll never think to look for Illumina among servants and Omegas. My baby will survive, even if I cannot. That's enough. That has to be enough." Nora sobbed into her hands, grief and rage and love all tangled together. Her mother had sacrificed everything, her power, her life, her daughter's knowledge of heritage, to buy Nora a chance at survival. And the pack that raised her had never known they housed the very thing they'd helped destroy. She didn't hear Draven enter, didn't register his presence until his arms carefully wrapped around her, solid and warm and present. I found her," Nora choked out. "My mother, she was powerful and brave, and she died protecting me, and I never knew. I never got to know her." Draven gathered her closer, letting her tears soak into his shirt. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize the pain. He simply held her while she grieved 17 years of loss, compressed into a single devastating afternoon. Finn quietly excused himself, taking the texts but leaving the portrait. Draven glanced at it over Nora's head, studying the woman who'd given her daughter both extraordinary gifts and terrible burdens. "She was beautiful," he said softly, "and brave beyond measure. She gave you life twice, once at birth, once through the seal." "The pack helped kill her," Nora said raggedly. "Elder Silas must have known. Must have been part of it." "Yes," Draven's voice turned hard as granite, "and we'll make him answer for it. But right now, you grieve. You honor her memory. You let yourself feel this." So Nora did. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes swollen, until the first wave of grief exhausted itself into hollow numbness. Draven held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair with infinite gentleness, murmuring words of comfort in an ancient language she didn't understand but felt in her bones. When she finally pulled back, the portrait lay between them. Alara's painted eyes seemed to look directly at her daughter, and Nora could have sworn she saw approval there. Pride, love that transcended death and time. "I'm going to learn," Nora whispered to the image. "Everything you tried to teach me through the seal, and every bit of power you hid to keep me safe, and I'm going to use it to stop whatever darkness you died fighting." Draven's hand found hers, lacing their fingers together. "We'll learn together, and when the time comes, we'll finish what your mother started." Nora nodded, carefully rolling the portrait and tucking it close to her heart. Her mother's final gift had been survival. Now it was Nora's turn to transform that survival into something that would make Alara proud. Outside, the moon rose full and silver over the sanctuary, painting everything in celestial light. The training ground was empty at dawn, frost glittering on stone like scattered diamonds. Nora arrived early, as had become her habit these past weeks, her body craving the physical outlet that sparring provided. Learning to fight was learning to reclaim space her body had been taught to minimize. Draven was already there, his breath misting in cold air as he moved through combat forms with fluid precision. He'd been teaching her daily since the discovery of her mother's texts. Not just physical defense, but the warrior's mindset she'd never been allowed to develop. "You're early," he said without breaking his rhythm. "So are you." Nora set down her water skin and moved to the center of the ring they'd marked out with stones. Their sessions had evolved beyond simple instruction. Now they danced around each other, Draven pushing her to react on instinct rather than overthinking every movement. He never held back enough to coddle, but never pushed so hard she felt overwhelmed. The balance was perfect, frustrating, exhilarating. Again," Draven said after she'd successfully countered his grab for the third consecutive time. "But faster. Your opponent won't give you time to calculate." They reset. This time when he moved, Nora didn't think, just reacted. She dropped beneath his reaching arms, pivoted, used his momentum against him. Her shoulder drove into his midsection with satisfying impact. Draven grunted approval even as he twisted, catching her wrist and pulling her off balance. They grappled, both breathing hard, neither willing to yield. Nora hooked her leg behind his knee the way he'd taught her, and suddenly they were falling together, hitting the packed earth in a controlled tumble that left her pinning his shoulders. "Better," he rumbled, pride evident in his voice and something else. something that made the air between them crackle with electricity. But Nora became acutely aware of their position, her thighs bracketing his hips, her hands pressed against the solid muscle of his chest, his face inches from hers. The silver warmth in her chest pulsed, but this time it was accompanied by something new, something golden and bright that seemed to reach outward, searching and finding. The bond snapped into place like the final tumbler in a lock clicking home. One moment they were two separate beings, the next, a golden thread wound between them, connecting soul to soul, heart to heart. Nora gasped as Draven's emotions flooded through the link. Fierce protectiveness, desperate longing, bone-deep certainty, and underneath it all, love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "You feel it," Draven breathed, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "Yeah, I've felt it since that first moment. Since I saw you standing there in the snow, terrified and defiant and so beautiful it hurt to breathe. I knew then, you were mine, my mate, my moon." "Why didn't you tell me?" Nora whispered. "Because you needed time. Needed to choose freely without the bond's influence." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I would have waited forever if that's what you needed. Would have protected you from a distance, content just knowing you were safe and whole." Through the bond, Nora felt the absolute truth of his words. Felt the weeks of restraint, the careful distance he'd maintained despite every instinct screaming at him to claim, to hold, to keep. He'd given her space to heal, to discover herself, to come to him as an equal rather than a desperate creature seeking shelter. "I choose you," she said, the words emerging with certainty that resonated through every fiber of her being. "I choose this. Choose us." Draven's control shattered. He surged upward, reversing their positions with careful strength, and kissed her with 17 years of loneliness and longing poured into a single point of contact. Nora met him with equal fervor, the bond between them singing with recognition and rightness. They barely made it back to his cave, hands mapping skin, mouths learning taste and texture, the bond amplifying every sensation until Nora couldn't tell where she ended and Draven began. When he finally claimed her beneath furs and firelight, the golden thread between them blazed incandescent. Later, much later, they lay tangled together watching stars wheel overhead through the cave's opening. Draven's fingers traced idle patterns across her spine, while Nora rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and sure. "You're my moon," he murmured into her hair, voice rough with emotion and satisfaction. "My light in darkness, and I will burn the world before I let anyone dim you." Through the bond, Nora felt his vow settle into permanence, felt her own matching determination rise to meet it. She'd spent her whole life being told she was broken, worthless, less than. But here, wrapped in her mate's arms with their souls entwined, she finally understood the truth. She wasn't broken, she was being forged, tempered by suffering into something stronger than those who'd never been tested could comprehend. "And you're my anchor," she whispered back, "my home." At the first person who saw me and didn't look away. Draven's arms tightened around her, protective and possessive and perfect. Outside, the moon hung full and bright, blessing their union with silver light. For the first time in her life, Nora felt complete. The attack came at midnight when the sanctuary's guards were changing shifts, that vulnerable heartbeat between one watch and the next. Nora woke to screams and the acrid smell of something burning that wasn't wood or flesh, but something fundamentally wrong. She stumbled from her cave to find chaos painted in shadow and firelight. Wolves fought across the terraces, but these weren't normal opponents. The creatures attacking moved wrong, their forms flickering between solid and smoke, their movements jerky and unnatural like puppets with tangled strings. One lunged past Stone's defensive position, and Nora got her first clear look at the enemy. It wore the shape of a wolf, but corrupted. Fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, limbs too long and jointed at wrong angles, And eyes. Gods, the eyes. Black voids that pulled at her vision, threatening to swallow her whole if she stared too long. Stay back! Draven's roar cut through the confusion. He fought three of the creatures simultaneously, his massive wolf form darting between them with lethal efficiency. Each strike he landed produced a sound like tearing fabric, and wherever his teeth connected, the shadow wolves bled darkness that hissed against stone. Nora pressed herself against the cave wall, trying to stay out of the way, while her useless human form offered nothing in defense. The silver warmth in her chest pulsed frantically, responding to the threat but not knowing how to manifest against it. A scream drew her attention to the lower terrace where Finn had been cornered by two of the creatures. Without thinking, Nora grabbed a fallen torch and ran toward him, shouting to draw their attention. It worked too well. One of the shadow wolves turned with unnatural speed, its void eyes locking onto her. The other creatures across the battlefield seemed to sense something, their movements becoming more focused, more purposeful. They began disengaging from their fights, orienting toward her like iron filings finding a magnet. The nearest one approached with deliberate slowness, its form solidifying slightly as if her presence gave it more substance. When it spoke, the voice emerged like grinding bones, yet like the sound of tombs opening after centuries sealed. The lumina awakens. The words scraped against reality itself. We have waited centuries to feast on divine light. Your mother denied us. You will not. Terror froze Nora's limbs, even as her mind screamed at her to run. This thing knew about her mother. Had probably been there when Alara died. The silver warmth in her chest turned scorching, but she didn't know how to channel it, how to transform fear and fury into the light she'd manifested once before. The shadow wolf lunged, jaws gaping to reveal teeth made of concentrated darkness. Draven hit it from the side like an avalanche, his black and silver form colliding with the creature in an explosion of force. They rolled together, snarling and tearing. The shadow wolf's substance proved difficult to grip, sliding through Draven's jaws like oil, but he persisted with savage determination. Finally, his teeth found purchase in something vital. The creature released a sound like reality screaming, and then it simply dissolved, not dying so much as unmaking itself, collapsing into smoke that dissipated on the mountain wind. But the others kept coming, drawn to Nora like moths to flame. Draven's wolves formed a protective circle around her, fighting desperately against enemies that barely registered conventional damage. Fire! Mara's voice cut through the chaos, the elderly cook emerging from her cave with a torch. They fear consecrated flame. Use the ritual fires. The sanctuary wolves quickly adapted, driving the shadow creatures toward the sacred fire pits that Mara maintained for ceremonies. Where ordinary flame touched the corrupted forms, and they recoiled, hissing. Where consecrated fire connected, they burned, not with heat, but with purifying light that made them shriek and dissolve. The battle turned. Within minutes, the remaining shadow wolves retreated, flowing up the mountainside like spilled ink running in reverse. Their departure left behind only scorch marks and the lingering smell of wrongness. Draven shifted back to human form, bleeding from a dozen wounds that oozed darkness instead of blood. He swayed, and Nora rushed to support him, despite her own trembling. "What were those things?" someone asked into the stunned silence. Mara approached slowly, her expression grave beneath the blood splattered across her weathered face. She'd fought too, Nora realized, despite her age and failing eyesight. "Shadow Coven," the elder said quietly. "I thought they were myths. Oh, cautionary tales to frighten pups." "They're real enough," Stone growled, examining a wound on his arm that refused to stop bleeding darkness. "Wolves who turn to forbidden magic," Mara continued, her voice heavy with old knowledge, "tried to consume the moon goddess's power directly instead of accepting her gifts with gratitude. She exiled them, stripped away their ability to walk in light. They've existed in the spaces between ever since, feeding on corruption and hunting anything divine." Her milky eyes found Nora with unerring accuracy. If they're hunting her, she didn't need to finish. Everyone understood. Nora was prey to predators who'd waited centuries for another chance to devour divine light, the same creatures who'd killed her mother, and now they knew exactly where to find her. "We fortify," Draven declared, at his voice rough with pain, but unshakable in authority. "Double the guards, consecrate every entrance, and we prepare for war." His eyes met Nora's across the blood-stained terrace, the mate bond thrumming with fierce protectiveness and grim determination. "They want you?" he said quietly, for her ears alone. "They'll have to go through every wolf in this sanctuary first. And I promise you, love, we'll make them regret ever emerging from their shadows." The white flag appeared 3 days after the Shadow Wolf attack, carried by a lone figure ascending the mountain path at dawn. Elder Silas moved slowly, his hands raised in the traditional gesture of parley, his aged face arranged in lines of false concern. Draven's warriors tracked him from the moment he crossed into their territory, arrows nocked and ready. By the time Silas reached the main terrace, every able-bodied wolf in the sanctuary had assembled, their expressions ranging from hostile to murderous. "I come in peace," Silas called, his voice carrying that authoritative timbre Nora remembered from countless humiliations. "To negotiate the Omega's safe return and prevent further bloodshed." "There's nothing to negotiate," Draven said flatly, positioned protectively in front of Nora. "She stays. You leave, preferably before I forget the laws of parley." Silas's eyes flicked past Draven to lock onto Nora, and something cold slithered across her skin. Recognition, hunger, triumph barely concealed beneath diplomatic performance. "The girl is in danger here," Silas continued smoothly. "Those creatures that attacked, we have knowledge of them. Protection your rogue sanctuary cannot provide. Let us take her to safety, properly consecrate her against—" "Liar!" Mara's voice cut through his speech like a blade. The elderly cook stepped forward, her milky eyes somehow seeing more than those with perfect vision. "I smell shadow magic on you, Elder, clinging to your robes like rot. You didn't come to protect her, you came to deliver her." Silas's mask slipped for just a heartbeat, revealing something vicious underneath. Then he smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all. "Clever," he said softly. "I'd forgotten how the old ones could sense corruption. A pity." He raised his hand, and shadow wolves poured from the forest like a breaking dam. Dozens of them, far more than had attacked before, their twisted forms blotting out the rising sun. But worse, mixed among them were Golden Moon warriors, wolves Nora recognized from her years of servitude, now fighting alongside the coven with dead eyes and mechanical movements. "Enthralled!" Mara breathed in horror. "He's given them to the shadows in exchange for power." The sanctuary erupted into chaos. Draven shifted mid-roar, launching himself at the nearest cluster of attackers. His wolves followed, forming defensive positions, even as they were quickly overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Silas moved through the battle with unnatural speed, heading straight for Nora. She tried to run, but shadow wolves cut off her escape. Tried to fight, but her human form was useless against creatures that barely registered physical damage. His hand clamped around her throat, lifting her off her feet with strength no elderly wolf should possess. "You were supposed to die," he hissed, at his breath reeking of decay. "I poisoned your milk with wolfsbane from infancy, kept you weak and sick, praying you'd simply fade away before the seal ever broke. A sealed Lumina is useless if she never awakens." Nora clawed at his grip, gasping for air. Through her fading vision, she saw Draven fighting desperately to reach her, cutting down enemies with savage efficiency but unable to close the distance fast enough. "But you survived," Silas continued, dragging her toward a ritual circle that had been carved into stone. When? How long had he been planning this? "Stubborn, like your mother. She wouldn't give us her power either. Had to be torn apart before the coven could feast on her remains." His smile turned grotesque. "But you, little Omega, you'll serve a better purpose. fuel for gods. The Shadow Coven will consume your divine light and finally break the moon goddess's curse. He threw Nora into the center of the circle. Symbols flared to life around her, glowing sickly green. Shadow wolves abandoned their fights, converging on the ritual site with single-minded hunger. Then Kira was there, appearing from the chaos with her auburn wolf form streaked in blood. Nora braced for another attack, another betrayal. Instead, Kira positioned herself between Nora and the approaching shadows, snarling defiance. "What are you doing?" Silas demanded. "Kill her! Fulfill your oath!" Kira shifted to human, standing naked and bleeding but unbowed. "My oath was to the pack, not to you, not to these abominations." Her eyes found Nora's, and for the first time they held something other than contempt, understanding, regret. "I see it now. And see what they did to you, what they did to me. Just prettier chains, but chains nonetheless. We were both just tools to them." "Foolish girl," Silas began. Kira moved with warrior speed, her claws extending as she lunged not at Nora, but at Silas himself. She raked across his chest, disrupting the ritual's flow. The green light flickered and died. Silas roared in fury, his hand shooting forward with dark energy crackling around his fingers. The blast caught Kira in the chest, lifting her off her feet and slamming her into stone with sickening force. "Run!" Kira gasped, blood bubbling from her lips. "Get her out!" Nora scrambled from the broken circle, catching Kira as she fell. The Beta's daughter was dying, her chest torn open by shadow magic that ate at her from the inside out. "I was wrong about you, Omega," Kira whispered, at her hand finding Nora's with surprising strength. "All those years, I thought rank made me better, made me worthy. But you were always stronger, braver." Her breathing rattled. "Be the queen I could never be. Make them remember." Her eyes glazed, her final breath escaping in a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Nora cradled the body of her tormentor-turned-savior, grief and rage warring in her chest. The silver warmth there pulsed frantically, responding to her emotions, building towards something that felt like detonation. Silas advanced on her, shadow magic wreathing his hands. How touching, but ultimately meaningless. "You cannot stop this girl. You cannot even shift to defend." Draven hit him like a meteor strike, his massive wolf form bearing Silas to the ground with bone-crushing force. They rolled together, as a snarling mass of fangs and fury. Stone appeared at Nora's side, hauling her upright. "We need to fall back. There's too many." "No." Nora's voice emerged steady despite her tears. "No more running. No more hiding." The silver warmth in her chest cracked, and light began to bleed through. The moon temple had stood in ruins for generations, its crumbling stones half reclaimed by forest and time. Silas dragged the battle here deliberately, herding Draven's forces toward the ancient site where moon guardians had once administered justice. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. He would corrupt this sacred ground by consuming Nora's light where her ancestors had once blessed the worthy. Nora stumbled through the shattered archway, her hands bound with silver-laced rope that burned her skin. Around her, the sanctuary wolves fought desperately against overwhelming numbers, their formation collapsing as shadow wolves and enthralled golden moon warriors pressed from all sides. At the temple's center, Silas had prepared his triumph. Silver chains hung from ancient pillars, and within them, Draven hung barely conscious. They'd beaten him with silver-tipped weapons, until his regeneration couldn't keep pace, until his massive form was more blood than fur. His amber eyes tracked Nora's approach with desperate fury, but he couldn't break free. "The choice is simple," Silas announced, his voice carrying across the battlefield with unnatural amplification. "Surrender yourself to the ritual, let us consume your power peacefully, and I'll release your mate. Yet your wolves can retreat to their mountain and live out their meaningless lives." His smile turned cruel. "Resist. And I'll make you watch while I tear them apart one by one, starting with the rogue alpha. To emphasize his point, he nodded to a shadow wolf. The creature raked claws across Draven's already ravaged side, drawing a roar of pain that shattered something in Nora's chest. "Stop!" she screamed. "I'll do it. I'll give you what you want. Just stop hurting him." "Nora, no." Draven's protest cut off as another blow landed. She moved toward the ritual circle Silas had carved into the temple floor, her mind racing. There had to be another way, had to be something she could do besides surrender and doom them all. But what? She still couldn't shift, couldn't access the power that supposedly slumbered inside her. The seal remained stubbornly intact despite weeks of attempting to crack it further. Unless... Nora's mind flashed to Kira's final words. "Be the queen I could never be." To her mother's journal entries, "She'll hate me for the weakness, but alive is better than enslaved." To Draven's faith when he'd first shown her the carvings, "You're meant for something greater." The seal wasn't a prison. It was a chrysalis, and she'd been so focused on breaking it from the outside that she'd never considered simply stepping through from within. Silas grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the circle's center. Finally, after 17 years of waiting, the last lumina, served up willingly. "You killed my mother," Nora said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Poisoned me, tortured me, used me, and all because you were afraid of what I might become." "Afraid?" Silas laughed. "I was practical. Your kind threatened the natural order. Wolves need hierarchy, need strength measured in fangs and fury, not—" He gestured dismissively at her. "Divine light and spiritual nonsense." "You were right to be afraid," Nora whispered. The seal didn't crack. It shattered, like glass struck by a hammer, like ice beneath spring sun, like every chain that had ever bound her exploding simultaneously. Power erupted from Nora's core in a supernova of silver light. Her body shifted, not into a normal wolf, but into something the world hadn't seen in centuries. She grew, her form expanding until she towered over the largest warriors. Fur rippled across her skin, pure silver white that glowed with inner radiance. Her eyes became twin moons, luminous and ancient and absolutely merciless. She was Lumina, the moon wolf, and she was done being prey. Her first howl shook the temple foundations, a sound that resonated with divine authority. Shadow wolves shrieked and fled from the light radiating from her form. The enthralled golden moon warriors collapsed as her power burned away the dark magic controlling them, freeing them to witness what they'd served. Silas stumbled backward, his confidence evaporating into visceral terror. "Impossible! The seal should have— You can't!" Nora's massive head swung toward him, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of judgment. "You wanted my power, Elder? Here it is." She moved like liquid moonlight, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Her jaws closed around Silas's shoulder, not to kill, but to grip. Power flowed from her into him, as not destroying but severing, cutting the connection between man and wolf with surgical precision. Silas screamed as his wolf was ripped away, the part of his soul that made him pack, made him more than human, torn out by its roots. When Nora released him, he collapsed to his knees, suddenly diminished, suddenly mortal. "You wanted to strip away my gifts," Nora said softly. "Now you know how it feels." The remaining shadow wolves attempted one final assault, converging on her in a wave of corrupted darkness. Nora's light blazed brighter, becoming painful to witness. Where it touched the coven creatures, they didn't just die, they were purified. Their stolen power returned to the moon from whence it came, their forms dissolving into silver mist. In seconds, the battle was over. The Shadow Coven, ancient predators who'd haunted the darkness for centuries, was gone, destroyed by the very divine light they'd sought to devour. The freed Golden Moon warriors and the few pack members who'd followed Silas willingly fell to their knees, heads bowed in submission and awe. They'd come to capture an Omega. They'd found a goddess. Nora turned to the silver chains holding Draven. Her power flowed out like a gentle wave, corroding the metal, freeing him. He shifted back to human, collapsing to his knees, and then, despite his injuries, shifted again into his massive black wolf with silver streaks. He limped to her side and stood there, smaller than her celestial form, but no less fierce. Black and silver, earth and moon, darkness and light, perfectly balanced. Two halves of a whole, finally complete. The transformation's energy began to fade. Nora felt herself shrinking, the divine form too vast to maintain. She shifted back to human, stumbling as exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Draven was there instantly, catching her, cradling her against his chest as he shifted back to human form. His wounds were already healing, the worst of them sealing now that the silver's poison was purged. "My queen," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion and pride and bone-deep relief. "My moon and stars. My everything." Nora buried her face against his neck, breathing in his scent. Pine and smoke and home. Around them, wolves from both sides knelt in the ruins of the temple. Witnessing the moment, everything changed. The age of hiding was over. The Moon Guardians had returned, and nothing in the pack world would ever be the same. 3 months had transformed the volcanic peaks beyond recognition. Where once only Draven's sanctuary of outcasts had huddled in the shadows, now a thriving community sprawled across multiple terraces, connected by new walkways and bridges that symbolized the union of two worlds once thought incompatible. Nora stood at the highest point, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of amber and rose. Below, the combined territories bustled with life, cooking fires sending fragrant smoke into the evening air, children's laughter echoing off stone, the rhythmic sounds of construction as new shelters rose to accommodate the steady stream of arrivals. They came from everywhere. Omegas fleeing abusive packs, warriors scarred beyond their former community's tolerance, wolves born with differences their birth packs had labeled as defects. As word had spread across the territories, the Moon Guardian had returned, and she welcomed all. The trials had been necessary but painful. After the battle at the Moon Temple, the Golden Moon Pack had fractured completely. Those who'd knowingly participated in the massacre of Nora's ancestors, the elders who'd plotted with Silas, the warriors who'd helped hunt Moon Guardians, faced Nora's judgment. She hadn't killed them. Death would have been mercy they didn't deserve. Instead, she'd done to them what she'd done to Silas, severed their wolves, leaving them hollow and human. They'd been exiled with enough supplies to reach human settlements, never to return to pack lands again. The younger generation, those who'd grown up indoctrinated but never actively participated in atrocities, she'd given a choice. Most had chosen to stay, to learn, and to help construct the new world rising from the ashes of the old one. They worked alongside former outcasts now. The old hierarchies dissolved into something based on character rather than birth. "You're brooding again," Draven's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. "I can feel it through the bond." Nora smiled, leaning into his embrace. The mate bond had only strengthened since the temple, a constant golden thread connecting them. Not brooding, just taking it all in. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "On what specifically?" "Everything we've built. Everything that's changed." She gestured to the sprawling community below. "The other packs are following our example. And I got word this morning, 3 more territories have abolished rank-based discrimination. 4 others are requesting guidance on integration." "The world is changing because you changed it," Draven said simply. "You gave them permission to be better." A commotion near the main gate drew their attention. Another group of refugees had arrived. A small family. A mother and father with 2 young pups. all of them thin and exhausted from hard travel. One of the pups had a pronounced limp, his right hind leg twisted at an awkward angle. Nora watched Finn intercept them, his own limp no longer something he tried to hide. He'd become her apprentice, and was now training to lead diplomatic missions to other packs. He knelt to speak with the injured pup, and even from this distance, Nora could see the child's face transform from fear to hope. He'll make an excellent ambassador, Draven observed. He already is, Nora replied. Last week, he convinced the Ironwood Pack to accept their first Omega Council member. Your old pack, Draven. She felt his surprise through the bond, followed by deep satisfaction. Sarah would have loved that. I think she knows, Nora said softly, remembering the silver wolf she sometimes glimpsed in dreams. Always watching, always proud. They watched as Finn led the family toward the communal area where Mara had already spotted them and was waving them over with characteristic forcefulness. The elderly cook had become the sanctuary's unofficial grandmother, and her kitchen fed hundreds daily. The territorial alliances are holding strong, Draven reported, shifting to business. All 14 neighboring packs have signed the accord. In no more tribute systems, no more forced rankings, and any wolf has the right to seek sanctuary if their birth pack violates the terms. And the Shadow Coven? Nora asked, though she already knew the answer through the constant awareness her guardian powers provided. Gone. Completely. Draven's voice held grim satisfaction. Your light didn't just destroy the ones at the temple, it purged their entire existence. The ones hiding in the shadows across the territories simply dissolved. The moon goddess reclaimed what they'd stolen. Nora nodded. She'd felt it happen. The moment the last corrupted soul returned to moonlight, centuries of darkness finally purified. The threat that had haunted her mother's generation, that had driven moon guardians into hiding, was ended. Movement near the training grounds caught her eye. At former Golden Moon high rankers, sparred alongside sanctuary outcasts, the old division's meaningless now. Marcus taught a young Omega girl proper defensive stances with infinite patience. 3 months ago, such a scene would have been impossible. Now it was simply normal. Look, Draven murmured, nodding toward the nursery area. A dozen pups played together in the fading light, completely unsegregated by rank. One tiny pup with unusual pale fur, a genetic variation that would have marked her as defective in traditional packs, led a spirited game of chase. The others followed her naturally, accepting her leadership based on personality rather than bloodline. That's what we fought for, Nora whispered. Children who'll never know the old cruelties. Draven's hand moved to cover hers, where it rested on her stomach. Through the bond, she felt his surge of protective love. Their daughter, confirmed by the sanctuary's healer just yesterday, already pulsing with power that suggested she would be even stronger than Nora, a new generation of moon guardians, raised in safety and love. She'll change the world even more than we have, Draven said softly. She'll never have to hide what she is, Nora replied. That's enough. The moon began its ascent, full and silver and impossibly bright. Nora felt its pull as a warm connection to the source of her power. In quiet moments like this, she swore she could hear the moon goddess's approval, not in words, but in the feeling of rightness that settled over the sanctuary like a blessing. Finn appeared on a lower terrace, waving up at them with excitement. He'd probably found another text in the archives they'd established to preserve Moon Guardian history. Nora waved back, making a mental note to review it later. The other Guardians are awakening too, she told Draven, sharing news she'd only just confirmed. 3 so far, descendants who'd been sealed like I was. The Moon Goddess is calling us all back now that it's finally safe. You'll train them? Draven asked. We'll train them, together. Nora turned in his arms, meeting his amber eyes. This was never just my mission. We're partners in everything. Alpha and Guardian, Draven agreed. Warrior and light. Broken pieces that became whole, Nora added with a smile. They stood together as twilight deepened into night, watching their impossible sanctuary thrive. Wolves of every rank and ability moved through the terraces, united by shared values, rather than divided by arbitrary hierarchies. The future they'd dreamed of was already here, already real, already spreading across the territories like dawn breaking after centuries of darkness. Elder Silas lived out his days in a human settlement far from packlands, his wolf severed, his power broken. The Golden Moon Pack had been absorbed into the new order, their crimes recorded in history books so they'd never be forgotten or repeated. Kira's sacrifice was honored with a memorial stone where young wolves came to learn about redemption and courage. The Shadow Coven was destroyed, their threat ended forever. The old systems of oppression were crumbling across the territories as pack after pack adopted the Accord's principles. And Moon Guardians walked openly for the first time in centuries, no longer hiding, and no longer hunted. "Ready?" Draven asked, offering his hand. "Always," Nora replied, lacing her fingers with his. They descended together toward their people, toward the community they'd built through sacrifice and stubbornness and love. The moon rose full and bright above the peaks, bathing everything in silver light, watching over the Moon Guardian and her mate as they'd created a world where difference meant divine rather than defective. Nora paused at the terrace edge, looking back one final time at the sanctuary spreading below. Every light represented a life saved, a wolf accepted, a future secured. She placed her hand over her heart, feeling the silver warmth that had once been sealed away, but now burned bright and free. The girl who couldn't shift had become the guardian who changed everything. The broken Omega had become the queen who shattered hierarchies and rebuilt them into something beautiful. And the rogue who'd lost his sister had found redemption by saving thousands more. Their story was complete. The battles were won, the enemies defeated, the new world established and thriving. No more shadows lurked in wait, no more ancient threats remained. Just peace, just possibility, just a future where every wolf, regardless of rank, ability, or birth, could finally stand in the light. Draven squeezed her hand, and together they walked down to join their people. The age of Moon Guardians had returned, and this time, it was here to stay. If this story reached you, if Nora's pain felt real, and her victories made you cheer, if you found yourself longing for a sanctuary where you belong exactly as you are, then it did what I hoped. But there are more stories waiting, more outcasts whose journeys deserve witnessing, more guardians who need to awaken, more found families whose bonds deserve celebrating, and I need you there to listen to them. When you subscribe, you're joining a community that believes our differences are divine, our scars prove our survival, and the world's judgment doesn't define our worth. You're saying yes to more fierce heroines, protective heroes, and transformations that prove the world was wrong about us all along. Subscribe now, and I will see you in my next story.